Okay, so maybe you're thinking about a long-distance relationship. Or maybe you're already in one. Either way, we've got a whole stack of your sources right here.
Yeah.
And trust me, this isn't going to be the typical communication is key kind of advice.
Right.
We're really going to deep dive into these sources to figure out how to not just survive, but thrive in a long-distance relationship.
Yeah, it's actually pretty fascinating how much research has been done on this.
Right.
It's not just anecdotal anymore.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into some studies, get some expert opinions, and even look at some real-life stories from the sources you gave us.
Yeah.
Really give you a solid understanding of what makes these relationships work.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First things first, communication.
Oh, yeah.
We all know it's important, but one of the sources actually had this really interesting take on it.
Oh, yeah.
They called it strategic communication. So not just talking more, but actually talking smarter.
Right. It's about being intentional. Like instead of just hoping you catch each other online, actually scheduling those calls and maybe even mixing up the platforms you use.
Yeah.
Like one of the articles even mentioned sending a postcard every now and then.
Really?
Super old school, but apparently surprisingly effective.
I totally get that. It's like in a regular relationship, you have all those little spontaneous moments, like you bump into each other in the kitchen.
Exactly.
But with long distance, you actually have to create those moments.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a little handwritten note.
Yeah.
Did any of the sources talk about like specific communication styles that work well for long distance?
Yes. Actually, there was one study that found that couples who focus more on sharing positive experiences and emotions instead of just dwelling on the distance were way more likely to say they were happy with their relationship.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So it's not about ignoring the challenges, but just making an effort to also focus on the good stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like instead of just complaining about missing each other all the time, you could talk about something funny that happened during the day or something you're looking forward to.
Exactly, yeah. And that actually brings us to another really important aspect, which is visits.
Okay.
We're not just talking about any old visits here. We're talking about those strategically planned, memory-making extravaganzas.
Oh, yeah. Already picturing all those Instagram-worthy travel montages. But seriously, the sources actually went pretty deep into the psychology behind these visits.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One psychologist even described them as emotional refueling for the relationship.
Wow.
It's that anticipation, like the excitement of planning everything out and counting down the days, that actually strengthens the bond.
Okay, so it's like a mini vacation that you're both super invested in.
Exactly.
I love that. But one thing I always wonder about with long distance is trust. Like, how do you build and maintain trust when you're not physically together all the time?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. One of your sources, a therapist who specializes in long-distance relationships, talks about the importance of something they call radical transparency. It's not just about being honest, but it's about being really open about your feelings, your fears, even your insecurities.
So basically leaving no room for doubt or suspicion to creep in.
Exactly.
Do they have any advice on how to actually do that?
One suggestion was to establish really clear boundaries and expectations around social media.
Okay, so like, do you want to see every single party that your partner goes to, or are you okay with just hearing about it afterward?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I can see how that could prevent a lot of unnecessary drama.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not about trying to be controlling. It's about finding that level of openness that feels good for both of you.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, but let's not forget about the fun stuff, romance.
Of course not.
I'm a sucker for those grand gestures.
Yeah.
But some of the sources had some really clever ideas for how to put a little romance into the everyday.
Yeah, and what's actually fascinating is that these romantic gestures, even the small ones, aren't just about like fleeting happiness.
Right.
One study actually found that they play a really significant role in building intimacy and trust.
Okay, spill the tea. What were some of your favorite ideas?
Well, one article recommended sending handwritten letters or care packages.
Oh, that's nice.
Just having that tangible reminder of your love can be really powerful. And then there were some really cool virtual date night ideas, like cooking the same meal together over video chat,
Okay.
watching a movie simultaneously,
I like that.
even taking a virtual museum tour together.
Those are actually really fun. I can see how doing those short activities, even if they're virtual, could create that sense of connection.
Exactly.
I'm also curious about the role of technology in all of this. I mean, obviously video calls are huge,
Of course.
but did any of the sources talk about anything beyond that?
Yeah, they did. One tech expert talked about the potential of using shared calendars,
Okay.
but not just for scheduling calls, actually for creating that sense of shared routine.
Oh, interesting.
Like you could block out time for a virtual coffee break or a workout session together.
Oh, that's so smart. It's like creating those little touch points throughout the day, even if you're not physically together.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff, but one thing I've always wondered is, like, how do you deal with conflict when you're long distance?
Yeah.
Because arguments are tough enough in person.
They are.
How do you navigate that when you're miles apart?
Yeah, one of your sources, a relationship coach, had a really interesting take on this. He said that conflict in a long-distance relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing. He said it's actually an opportunity to practice those crucial communication skills and really learn how to resolve disagreements effectively.
Okay, but that's definitely easier said than done, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he had some really specific tips.
Yeah.
Like instead of trying to hash things out over text, which we all know can easily lead to misunderstandings,
Right.
schedule a phone call or a video call where you can actually see each other's facial expressions and hear each other's tone of voice.
Right, you need all those nonverbal cues to really understand where the other person is coming from.
You do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He also emphasized the importance of active listening.
Oh, for sure.
So it's not just about waiting for your turn to speak, it's about really hearing and understanding your partner's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Totally. And that's actually a good reminder for any relationship, not just long distance.
Right, absolutely. Speaking of good reminders, one of the sources had a whole section on staying positive and focused on the big picture.
Right, because it can be really easy to get caught up in the missing and the longing.
It can. Long distance is definitely a roller coaster of emotions. So how do you stay grounded and keep the faith when those doubts start creeping in?
One tip that really stuck with me was to create a vision board together.
Okay.
It could be a physical board or a digital one, but the idea is to visually represent your goals as a couple, both in the short term and in the long term.
Oh, I like that. So like pictures of the places you want to travel to together, or maybe even a dream house you're saving up for.
Exactly.
It's like tangible proof that this isn't just some temporary fling.
Right.
That there's actually a future beyond the miles.
Exactly.
I love that. And speaking of the future, one of the sources brought up a really important point that I think we should unpack a bit more,
Okay.
which is the importance of setting goals.
Yes, definitely. Because it's not enough to just say, oh, we'll make it work.
Right.
You actually need a plan, a roadmap for how you're going to navigate this long distance journey together.
Right. And it's not just about like logistical goals,
Right.
like visits or eventually living in the same place. It's about setting goals for the relationship itself.
Exactly.
Like, how often are you going to communicate? What are your boundaries when it comes to, socializing separately? What are your expectations for emotional support?
Those are all really good examples.
Yeah.
And it's important to have these conversations regularly.
Yeah.
To make sure you're both still on the same page as your lives are evolving.
Because let's face it, people change, circumstances change, and it's crucial to make sure that your relationship is evolving along with those changes.
Absolutely. Now, this next topic might seem a little counterintuitive, but it's something that all of your sources really emphasized,
Okay, I'm intrigued.
which is the importance of maintaining your own individual lives.
Wait, what? You mean like having hobbies and friends outside of the relationship? But isn't the whole point of long distance to stay as connected as possible?
It is. But one of your sources, a psychologist who studies relationship dynamics, made this really interesting distinction
Okay.
between interdependence and codependence.
Okay, I'm listening. Explain.
Okay, so interdependence is about being connected and supportive, but also recognizing that you are two separate people with your own needs and aspirations. Codependence, on the other hand, is about relying on the other person to complete you, to fulfill all of your needs.
Okay.
And that can be really unhealthy in any relationship,
Right.
but especially in a long-distance one.
So it's about finding that balance between being a we and also nurturing the me.
Exactly. And your sources actually had some great tips on how to do that,
Okay.
like setting aside time for your own hobbies, staying connected with your friends, and pursuing your own personal growth goals.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if you're just neglecting your own needs and just focusing on the relationship all the time, you're eventually going to end up feeling resentful and burnt out.
Exactly. And that's not good for anyone.
Right. No. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground already in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've talked about communication, visits, trust, romance, technology, conflict resolution, staying positive, setting goals, and maintaining individuality.
Phew. It's a lot to digest,
It is.
but it's all really crucial information for navigating the unique challenges of long-distance love.
It is. Welcome back. We're diving back into all this wisdom on making long-distance love work. One thing that keeps popping up in these sources is the idea of shared hobbies. Is that really that important when you're miles apart?
You know, it might seem kind of small, but your sources actually suggest it's a really powerful way to stay connected.
Okay.
And it's not just about having something to talk about. It's more about creating a shared experience, like a shared purpose.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the articles mentioned a couple who decided to learn a new language together online.
Really?
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, it's like instead of just talking about your day, you're actually doing something together,
Right.
even if it's virtual.
Mm-hmm.
Did your research mention any other examples?
Yeah, there was actually a study that found that couples who did shared activities regularly, even simple things like reading the same book or watching the same TV show, felt more emotionally close and happy with their relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like those invisible threads connecting you, even when you're physically apart.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's be real for a second.
Okay.
Long distance isn't all sunshine and roses.
There are definitely going to be moments of doubt, insecurity, maybe even some jealousy.
Of course.
Did any of the sources address that kind of stuff? Those tougher emotions?
Yeah, they did. And one thing that really stood out was the emphasis on actually proactively managing those feelings. It's not about pretending they don't exist.
Right.
It's about addressing them head on with open and honest communication.
So, like, if you're feeling jealous of your partner's new friends or insecure about the lack of physical intimacy, you shouldn't just bottle it up.
Exactly. One therapist actually recommended setting aside specific time to talk about these feelings.
Oh, wow.
Maybe like once a week or even more often if you need to. The key is to create a safe space where you both feel comfortable being vulnerable and expressing yourselves without judgment.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like by acknowledging those feelings, you take away some of their power.
Right.
And by talking about them openly, you can actually strengthen the relationship.
Absolutely. And it's not just about venting either. It's about working together to find solutions.
Yeah.
Maybe that means agreeing to check in more often when one of you is feeling anxious, or setting boundaries around social media interactions if jealousy is a problem.
So it's about being proactive and finding those coping mechanisms that work for both of you.
Exactly. Now, kind of shifting gears a bit, one theme that really came through in your sources was the importance of keeping a positive outlook.
Yeah, because let's be honest, long distance can be draining.
It can.
It's so easy to get caught up in the missing and the longing and all of that.
It is.
Did the sources offer any practical tips for staying optimistic?
Yeah, one was to actually focus on the benefits of long distance.
Really?
It might sound a little counterintuitive, but your sources actually argue that being apart can force couples to communicate better, to appreciate each other more, and to develop a stronger sense of independence.
So it's like you're turning those weaknesses into strengths.
Exactly. Another good tip was to create rituals that give you a sense of connection and anticipation. This could be anything from a weekly movie night over video chat to sending each other little gifts or letters.
Oh, I love that. It's like those little sparks of joy that keep the flame burning, even when you're miles apart.
Exactly.
I love that. But, okay, what about the bigger picture? Did any of your sources talk about long-term goals? Like, what are you actually working toward in a long-distance relationship?
Yeah, they did. And one thing that came up a lot was the importance of having an exit strategy.
Wait, an exit strategy? That sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, maybe. It's not about planning for failure, though.
Okay.
It's more about having a shared vision for the future. Like, do you eventually want to live in the same city? And if so, how are you going to make that happen?
So it's like having a timeline or at least some idea of how long you're willing to do the long distance thing.
Exactly. And it's really important to revisit these conversations regularly.
Okay.
Because, life happens, plans change, and you want to make sure you're both still on the same page.
That makes a lot of sense because without that shared goal, it's easy to just get lost in the day-to-day grind of long distance.
Yeah.
And lose sight of why you're doing this in the first place.
Exactly.
But okay, let's be real again.
Okay.
Even with the best intentions and the best communication, long distance can be really tough on you.
It can.
Did any of your sources talk about self-care?
Yes, they did. And one thing that actually surprised me was the emphasis on maintaining your own social life.
You mean like going out with friends, doing hobbies.
Yeah, even if your partner isn't physically there to join you.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. One study found that people who had a strong social support system outside of their long-distance relationship were much happier
Oh, wow.
and less likely to feel lonely or isolated.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you can't expect your partner to be your everything, even if you're in a committed relationship.
Right.
You still need those other connections to feel balanced and fulfilled.
Exactly. And it's not just about socializing either. Your sources also talked a lot about taking care of your physical and mental health.
Yeah, of course.
This could be anything from exercising regularly and eating healthy to practicing mindfulness or even going to therapy if you need to.
Yeah. It's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't really show up for your partner.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another important aspect of self-care in long-distance relationships:
Okay, what's that?
managing expectations.
What do you mean by that?
Well, one of your sources, a relationship coach, talked about accepting that there will be times when you feel disconnected or frustrated with the distance.
Yeah.
It's totally natural.
Right. So it's like giving yourself permission to not be okay all the time.
Exactly. And it's also about communicating those feelings to your partner.
Yeah.
So they know what you're going through and can be there for you.
That's so important. It's like instead of trying to pretend everything's perfect, you're creating a space for honesty and vulnerability,
Right.
which can actually bring you closer together.
It can. And it's also about setting realistic expectations for communication.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to talk 24/7. And that's totally okay.
Right.
It's more about finding a rhythm that works for both of you
Yeah.
and being comfortable with those moments of silence.
Right. The quality of the connection is more important than the quantity.
Exactly. Now, one thing that comes up all the time with long distance is the role of technology.
Sure.
We already talked about video chat and shared calendars, but did your sources mention anything beyond that?
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear what they found because technology is constantly changing.
It is.
I'm sure there are all sorts of new tools that can help bridge the distance.
There are. One article talked about the potential of virtual reality
Really?
to actually experience a sense of shared presence.
Wait, like you could put on a headset and feel like you're in the same room with your partner.
Exactly. It's still evolving, but there are already VR apps designed for couples. So you could do things like watch movies together, play games, or even just hang out in a virtual living room and talk.
That is so cool. It's like science fiction is becoming reality.
I know, right? And while it obviously can't replace physical touch and being there in person, it can be a really powerful way to feel more connected and to make memories together.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It makes me wonder what other tech advancements we'll see in the future that can help long-distance couples.
Right. Who knows? Maybe holographic communication, maybe even teleportation someday.
Right.
But one thing's for sure, technology is definitely playing a bigger and bigger role in how we experience love and intimacy, even when we're far apart.
Absolutely. Okay, but let's come back to the present for a minute.
Okay.
Did your sources have any advice specifically for dealing with the everyday challenges of long distance?
Yeah, one thing that really resonated with me was the importance of finding ways to celebrate the small victories.
Okay, I like that. What kind of victories are we talking about?
It could be anything, really. From getting through a tough week without seeing each other to finally booking those plane tickets for your next visit.
So it's about finding those little glimmers of hope and joy amidst the challenges.
Exactly. And it's about acknowledging those victories, both individually and together as a couple. Maybe you send a celebratory text or plan a special virtual date night to mark the occasion.
Oh, I love that. It's like those little moments of celebration really help to reinforce the good parts of the relationship
Yeah,
and keep you motivated to keep going.
exactly. And it's also about finding ways to support each other through the rough patches.
Because let's be real, there will be days when you just want to give up,
Oh, absolutely.
when the distance feels unbearable.
There will be.
Yeah.
And that's when it's really important to have each other's backs. One of your sources recommended actually creating a coping toolbox together.
Oh, okay.
This could be a list of activities, songs, movies, anything that helps lift your spirits and remind you of how strong your connection is.
Oh, that's such a good idea. It's like having a personalized first aid kit for those emotional emergencies.
Exactly. And it's about being proactive, knowing that even though long distance is tough, you have the tools and the support to get through the challenges together.
Right. Okay, I feel like we've covered so much ground just in the second part of our deep dive.
We have.
We talked about shared hobbies, managing difficult emotions, staying positive, setting long-term goals. having your own life, the role of technology, and the importance of self-care and celebrating the little wins.
Wow, yeah. That's a lot to take in. But I think it really shows how complex, but also how beautiful long-distance relationships can be.
They're definitely not for the faint of heart.
No.
But for those who are willing to put in the work, they can be incredibly rewarding.
For sure. Now, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and look at some actual stories from your sources.
Okay.
Stories of couples who have not only survived, but thrived in long-distance relationships.
I am so excited to hear those stories. They're like a beacon of hope and inspiration for anyone on this crazy journey.
Yeah, they are. So stay tuned, because we're going to wrap up this deep dive with some truly heartwarming and insightful tales of long-distance love.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into making love last the distance. We've talked about all the strategies and the communication and all that, but now I'm ready for some real-life inspiration. You mentioned some stories from the sources.
I did, yeah. And these aren't just your typical we met online and beat the odds stories. These are couples who came up with some really creative solutions, faced some unique challenges, and really learned a lot about themselves and their relationship in the process.
Okay, give me a story, one that really stood out to you.
One that I really liked was about a couple, Sarah and David, who had to do long distance because of their jobs.
Okay.
They both got these amazing job opportunities, but in different cities. What was interesting was how they approached their visits.
Oh.
Instead of just doing the usual weekend trips, they actually planned these month-long co-living experiences.
Co-living.
Yeah, so they'd take turns. Like 1 month, Sarah would go to David's city, and they'd rent an apartment together.
Okay.
And then the next month, David would go to Sarah's city, and they'd do the same thing. So they could really experience what it would be like to actually live together.
That is such a good idea. It's like a test drive for the relationship.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond just seeing the touristy stuff.
Right, right. So did it work out for them?
It did. The source said they learned so much about their compatibility during those times.
Like what?
Like how they handle chores, how they deal with each other's friends, even how they manage their money together. Stuff you don't really get from just short visits.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like you're not just falling in love with the idea of the person, you're getting a glimpse of what they're actually like.
Exactly.
What other stories caught your eye?
Oh, there was another one about a couple, Emily and Chloe, who are both artists, but they live in different countries.
Wow.
And they use their shared love of art to stay connected.
I love that. How?
Well, they would have these virtual studio sessions. Like they would video chat and show each other what they were working on and give each other feedback.
Oh, that's cool.
They even collaborated on some projects remotely.
Wow, so they actually turned the long distance into something creative.
They did. And eventually they saved up enough money to do an artist residency program together in a third country.
That's amazing. So they finally got to meet up in person.
They did, and it was a really pivotal moment for their relationship.
Yeah.
It helped solidify their bond and their commitment to making things work, even though they were apart.
I love these stories. They're so inspiring. Okay, as we wrap up, I'm really curious, what are your big takeaways from all these sources we looked at? Like, what are the key things people need to know about making long-distance love work?
Well, one thing that was super clear is that there's no magic formula, right?
Right. What works for one couple might be a total disaster for another.
Yeah.
It's all about finding what fits your specific dynamic, what works for you and your partner.
Right, you can get inspiration from other couples and from all these strategies, but ultimately, you have to create your own playbook.
Exactly. And that actually leads to another big takeaway, which is the importance of being flexible.
Oh, yeah.
Long distance is almost never a straight line. There are going to be bumps in the road, changes in plans, those moments when you just start to doubt everything.
So it's about being able to roll with the punches, being able to adjust your game plan as you go.
Exactly. And that takes really good communication, a willingness to compromise, and most importantly, a commitment from both of you to making things work, even when it's hard.
Yeah, it sounds like those long distance relationships that make it aren't just about love. It's about resilience and it's about teamwork.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this whole deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought that goes beyond all the strategies and tips we've talked about. Okay, I'm listening.
It's about perspective. It's so easy to see long distance as this burden, this obstacle you have to overcome.
Yeah.
But you can also see it as an opportunity, an opportunity for growth, both as individuals and as a couple. It can make you better communicators, make you appreciate those small moments more, and really help you understand yourself and your partner on a deeper level.
So it's like Choosing to see the distance not as something that separates you, but as something that strengthens your bond.
Exactly. And with that in mind, I would say, go into this journey with an open heart, a willingness to be flexible, and a deep belief in the power of love to overcome any distance.
That's beautiful. And to all our listeners out there who are maybe going through this long distance thing right now, remember, you're not alone.
Right.
There are so many others who have been there before you. Their stories and all the things we talked about today can be a guide, a source of inspiration.
Absolutely.
So embrace the challenges, celebrate those little victories, and never underestimate the power of love. This has been The Deep Dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time for another exciting exploration.